Dear Dysfunctional Diaries.
I want to be the basic bitch of IBS.
You want to be the face.
My ideal situation would be for people to have a community together where we can just navigate IBS together, work on our mindset around it, being able to accept that this is how our lives are and what makes it better, what makes it worse.
You studied nutritional therapy while you were working full-time, over 3 years.
I don't like when I feel like I'm being fobbed off, and I think with the GP I did feel a bit fobbed off, so I just wanted to have some autonomy and empowerment over my own body. I've always been quite slim and quite small, and I was intent on putting on weight and didn't go to the gym.
Because you were at the point that you weighed like 7 stone.
Yeah, I think it was 6.9.
Which is like quite underweight.
Very underweight,
for anyone really.
Yeah,
Like whoever you
apart from
are.
a small child.
Yeah. Your website gives, it's like a program of how to be able to better deal with IBS.
The first thing to look at is gut microbiome. I've worked with people who, as soon as we calm down their nervous system, symptoms are, reduced by 80%. You have a gut microbiome, you also have a face microbiome.
I took Reactane. As I was looking for your podcast, I saw that you did 3 episodes, which was sort of focused around Reactane.
The thing with Reactane is, it isn't a great idea, I don't think, for young people to be on it. Like, I just feel like it's quite an intense thing, especially for when you're so young and you're still developing.
What has been your favourite experience hosting your own podcasts?
People messaging me, like people going out of their way to find my email or my Instagram, be like, oh, hey, you don't know me, but I've just listened to your podcast and it's helped me so much.
Just for people watching, can you just sort of give a little intro to sort of who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
Yeah, my name's Atavia. I'm a nutritional therapist and I work with people specifically with gut health issues, so mainly IBS or IBS type symptoms.
Okay, and for me, well, I've done my research into it because I wanted to sort of have a decent understanding of it, but could you just give sort of a rundown as to what IBS is and what effects it has?
Sure. So IBS is a disorder of the gut, essentially, and it can present differently for different people. There are certain things that a clinician, like a doctor, has to do to rule that in or out, so they need to check for things like cancer and stuff. But essentially it presents as symptoms like bloating, flatulence, inconsistent stool habits, and changes in stool habits. And yeah, that's kind of the main way that it presents for most people.
Okay, got you. And so you have IBS yourself as well, don't you? But you had it when you, so it sort of, what age did you kind of start like noticing that it was sort of becoming a factor of your life?
Good question, yeah. I think the time when it became unavoidable and I had to do something about it was my early 20s. I've always been quite slim and quite small, and I was intent on putting on weight and didn't go to the gym. Instead, I thought, I'm just going to drink like 3,000 calorie protein shakes with milk every day, 3 times a day, which obviously looking back is the worst idea I've ever had. This was pre-nutrition days, obviously. And basically triggered lactose intolerance in myself quite severely, and then just did something to my gut where it just didn't recover. Before that, I'd always had problems with my gut, but my early 20s is where it got really bad, and just had like constant bloating, constant issues with like stool habits and fatigue and just discomfort. And yeah, at that point it was unavoidable really, like it just impacted my daily life.
Yeah, because you were at the point that you weighed like 7 stone.
Yeah, I think it was 6, I think that maybe it was like 6.9.
Which is like quite underweight.
Very underweight,
for anyone really.
Yeah,
Like whoever you
apart from
are.
a small child.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, so from there, you kind of thought like, this is, no one's really giving me some help here. I need to solve this myself in a way.
Yeah.
And so you studied nutritional therapy while you were working full-time, over 3 years.
Yeah.
Which probably was quite difficult, I imagine.
It was I feel like those 3 years, I don't really remember having a life because I don't think I had one, to be honest. But I think it got to the point where I'm quite stubborn and I don't like when I feel like I'm being fobbed off. And I think with the GP, I did feel a bit fobbed off and felt like I wasn't really getting answers and just didn't accept that, this is just something you have to live with. I thought this isn't true. And because my dad, who lives in Greece, has quite a successful clinic where he works with people with different health issues and does alternative therapy.
Okay.
He would always say to me, you need to learn your own thing and you need to like teach yourself.
Yeah.
So I decided, okay, maybe he's right then. At the age of like 24, I thought, okay, fine, I'll stop
right.
rebelling. Yeah, damn it. And thought, I'm going to find out what actually goes on in your body and what's going on in my gut, because obviously medical professionals couldn't, tell me what it was. So I just wanted to have some autonomy and empowerment over my own body, which I think a lot of people with long-term health conditions experience, because it's quite a frustrating place to be when you don't know what's going on and you're told that's just how you have to live.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought an interesting thing to start off would be I've actually got housemates at the moment
Oh yeah.
who are bulking
Okay.
to do with the gym.
Yeah.
And one of them in particular has a very interesting diet that he's put himself on in order to bulk. And I would just be interested to see your reaction to basically his meal, that his plan that he does throughout, and he's doing it for like about 2 months, he's planning on it. He's just started. So the first thing he told me was that he drinks 4 litres of full fat milk a day.
That's, yeah. Okay. I'm going to try not to react too much.
No, it's
harshly.
fine. You can react at the end. It's fine. You're allowed to. Please do. Because we've said to him, this is an awful idea.
It is an awful idea.
So he does 4 litres of full fat milk a day. On top of that, he does 5 litres of water. So he does 9 litres of liquid a day.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do any fruit. He doesn't do any veg. And he just eats basically like chicken, rice and pizza.
Okay.
So if you could give a rundown as to what was wrong with that.
I mean, I'd love to know his rationale. I'd be very interested to hear where that's come from. He sounds very much like me when I was in uni and trying to put on weight and bulk up. Yeah, in terms of, I mean, there's not a lot of nutritional value there, is there?
No.
He's probably going to trigger lactose intolerance in himself. Most people at some point in their life will develop lactose intolerance because we only produce lactase, which is the enzyme to break down lactose in milk, because there's like trace amounts in it in breast milk. So we develop it, you know, a little bit, and then we've kind of mutated, so to speak, to be able to tolerate it longer because we drink cow's milk. Most people sort of run out of that at some point, and then you'll probably trigger a lactose intolerance, which is what happened to me.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if that happened to him. But in terms of bulking up, I mean, I don't really hear lots of like, obviously he's got chicken, but what's the protein? What's the quality of that protein?
Yeah.
It sounds very like it's kind of like an easy thing to stick to in his mind, maybe?
I think he's got like quite severe autism.
Okay.
And so he literally said he sees food as like a number of calories that he can get in a day. And he's got a bit of like, he's quite addictive personality. And so like with the gym, he's got like quite the addiction to it, which I mean, there's much unhealthier addictions to have, but like with gym, you still need your rest days, you still need recovery time, and he's been on a 68-day streak where he's gone to the gym every day, and he's not had a rest day.
Yeah, that's quite bad. I mean, if you look at things like adrenals, for someone of, because how old is he? Early 20s?
2021, I think.
Yeah. If he was doing that in his 30s, he would have seen an impact a lot quicker. When you do things when you're younger, your body's able to recover a lot more quickly.
Which is his thought process.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be okay because he's not getting any younger, he's only getting older, right?
Yeah.
But he's basically putting stacking factors up to lead him to a place that is, you know, triggering unhealth potentially. So if you look at your adrenals, for example, your adrenals need to have, you know, like ebb and flow. You need to have times of using your adrenals and then times of relaxation so they can replenish. If you're going to the gym every single day, you're going to end up potentially in adrenal fatigue. You've probably spiking your cortisol level to be super high all the time. And then you're going to end up in adrenal fatigue because you're sort of like, imagine sitting in a car and revving the engine but not being in gear. You're just going to burn out, you know, the petrol or the diesel or whatever. That's kind of what he's doing with going to the gym and not having any rest days. He's not giving himself a chance to fuel the car back up. He's just burning it out essentially. So yeah, I would say I would recommend against that.
That's such a professional response. I'd recommend against that. You should do that.
It's not healthy.
Yeah, no, we've told him this, and just not from that technical point of view, but we have told him this.
But I think in terms of also long-term gain, because if you think of something like the gym, it's not something that you just like overnight in 3 months, you're going to bulk up and then never have to go again, right? It's going to be something that you want to do and you want to enjoy consistently. So really, if you look at it long-term, rest is part of the gym. Like that is most people will tell you who are like proper gym goers and, you know, aren't on testosterone or whatever, they will tell you that rest is essential. That's an essential part of your training program because you need to allow your body to rest and recover. Give it that kind of respect that it needs to have downtime so then it can perform at peak level. So yeah, that's just another thing I'd say to him. And for your friend as well, it'd also be taking into account the neurodivergence. I'm neurodivergent as well. I don't have autism, but I've got ADHD, so I can relate to it in some respects. But it would be looking at how that feeds into his behaviour with that, because for a lot of people, you do get, I'm not saying this is your friend, but a lot of people become obsessed with the feeling of the pump after you've been to the gym.
Yeah, he does do that.
Yeah, so it's like getting used to the feeling of not having that pump afterwards, and like, oh, you don't feel that swelling feeling, that's okay, your body needs that. But I think in terms of people who do the bulk and cut and, you know, take it really seriously, you have to kind of sacrifice other areas of your life for that, because you are literally putting your body, it's like that's the main thing that you focus on.
Yeah.
And I've got a friend who does that, and it doesn't do much else because that's his main focus, and you don't really have that much time or motivation for relationships or maybe career or whatever it might be, because that's like your main focus. So depends on whether you want to have a balance, I guess, or you know, you're happy with that being the main thing that, you know, you do and think about. For me now, but yeah.
No, it's the same. It's the same here, literally, because obviously especially when I'm back at uni like this. Like during summer, when it's like you're a bit more chilled out and you've got your break, it's easier to get back into it because you have that spare time.
Yeah.
But realistically, amongst everything else you're doing, unless you're planning on going into a sports job that's to do with like PTing or coaching or whatever, I think it's almost impossible to have like a healthy balance of gym to life if you're going like 6 times a week.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And it's also looking at the progress that you want and what's your aim. So I've got a friend who enters into competitions. That's his main thing. That's all he really cares about. You know, he's got family and stuff, but that's his main thing outside of his family. Not he's like, screw family.
Slight shit about
yeah, it's like, okay, I care about my child and the gym. But like, that's got to be your main, you can't mess around with that, right? It's like Ronaldo was saying, you know, you have to be committed every single day. You can never slack if you want to be the best of the best. But that obviously means you're going to have to sacrifice other areas of your life as well. And, you know, if you want to have a well-rounded life and be going to uni and doing career and stuff, it can be hard to, you know, give all of that the same amount of attention if you want to see progress in that area.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, I don't think.
No,
possible.
it's true. It is true, literally. It's exactly like you've said it. But I'll go more into the IBS stuff now, because obviously that is a big part of what you do. So your website gives sort of a few steps as to, it's like a program almost of how to be able to better deal with IBS, because from my understanding, IBS is one of those things that never completely goes away. It's always with you, but there's a way to not control it, but to
like manage it.
Manage it. So would you be able to go into sort of this program that you have and what the sort of steps are? Yeah,
sure. So this really came about just through working with people and seeing the common themes, and with myself and friends who've got IBS. And the first thing really that you need to look at, I mean, you have to look at all kind of areas, but essentially once you've done a health history of somebody, you can usually see what the trigger usually was, like the trigger point, and what's keeping the IBS going. But the first thing to look at is gut microbiome, because so many people have, you know, our gut microbiome houses millions and billions and trillions of different organisms that we need in very specific levels to help our gut function.
I think that's the gut microbiome is like such a massive term now.
Yeah, it is.
That suddenly everyone's kind of discovered it in the past however many years, and all of a sudden every podcast has somebody, a gut microbiome expert who comes on and talks about it. But anyways, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. It's such a massive thing as well. It's hard to kind of explain it in, you know, people talk about it in quite broad terms, but there's so many intricacies to your gut microbiome, and there's so much research coming out, you know, more recently on it as well. My dad used to talk to me about the gut like years and years and years ago, and he'd say, you'll see, classic Greek man, you'll see years from now everyone will be talking about this. I was like, yeah, whatever, Dad. And I'm like, oh, he was right, to be fair. So there's so much like emerging research on it now, I think, because there's just funding for it. And people are realizing what a massive impact it has on metabolism, on sex drive, your hormones, your mental health, cognition, you know, not just your gut, the rest of your body. But yeah, that's the main thing that, you know, the first thing to look at is, does there seem to be some imbalance there? And there are certain probiotics that I use that they specifically research the different strains of bacteria, and they use those strains for people with IBS, because there's commonalities across people who have IBS. They tend to be low in certain like strains of bacteria, but basically just making sure that your microbiome is supported. And then looking at any food intolerances. So I have worked with some people who they pretty much most of their symptoms were triggered by a food intolerance. And when you remove that and do a little bit of, you know, reparation work from where they've eaten the intolerance food, their gut is okay. They don't really have like long-term issues because they've just removed that trigger food. they're the lucky people. If you just notice one thing and then you can remove it, then they can go about their normal life. It's fine, but that's not common really for a lot of people. And then looking at stress is like one of the biggest triggers that I see. So it kind of keeps things driving a lot of the time for people. And I think because stress is such a, it's a kind of like a non-tangible, like untangible thing. It's not like a food that you're eating. A lot of people seem to underestimate the impact it has. And because I do feel like people talk about stress a lot and the fight or flight, it becomes sort of white noise for a lot of people and they don't really take it seriously.
Yeah.
But I've worked with people who, as soon as we calm down their nervous system, there's, oh, my symptoms are, reduced by 80% because it has such a massive impact, because your gut and your brain are literally connected, right, through nerves.
Yeah.
So anything that's happening in your nervous system can impact your gut. So those are the main things I look at. And then just looking at any kind of inflammatory factors. So if you've got damage in your gut, a lot of the time you'll have some, low-level inflammation from the damage in your gut. So just calming that down, because any kind of level of inflammation can cause you to feel maybe a bit of like cramping or discomfort or a little bit of abdominal pain. So those are kind of the 4 areas that I look at with people when they first come to clinic, and just kind of see which one is, most of the time they're all at play, but which one's the main one for like each individual.
Okay. And for each individual, is it different sort of looking at, like, what is one of the most noticeable things when you're dealing with someone that you're like, okay, that's an obvious sign, and what are the more sort of subtleties that maybe people who aren't as well educated about it wouldn't pick up on?
I think obvious signs are someone who's had a lot of antibiotics in their life. If someone says they've had intravenous antibiotics, or like when I was younger I was put on oral antibiotics for 6 months for mild acne, and that was just insane to me now. But anything like antibiotic use, because that's literally antibacteria and it will disrupt your gut microbiome. Or if there's a significant period of food poisoning that they maybe haven't recovered from, that's quite a clear sign that your gut microbiome is going to be, compromised essentially.
Yeah.
And more subtle, I would say a lot of people aren't really aware of how much we overeat a lot of the time, and the burden we put on our gut.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've seen the Blue Zones program on Netflix.
I haven't.
It's Secrets to Live to 100. They're blue zones of the world. So the 5 zones in the world that have the most centenarians, so people who live to 100 and are healthy doing so. And something they found in one region, which was Okinawa, Japan, was the people there would eat until they were 80% full. Not 100% full, or not like 150% full, like a lot of us do.
Yes.
So essentially they would eat before they were full, and that helped their gut to manage the food. And essentially, instead of overburdening it and then causing it damage because it's struggling to keep up with what we're eating, it gives it time to digest and then, heal itself. A lot of people will eat late, will snack in the evening, and I do it too, I'm not perfect. I'll sometimes be like, I'm watching Netflix, I'll screw it, I'll get, I'll have a pizza, or I'll get some snacks out, and then go to bed and forget that when you're sleeping, your body's supposed to be healing itself and regenerating. But how can it do that when it's got, big old pizza stuck in there trying to digest when you're supposed to be shut off for the evening? So that's something that a lot of people are quite surprised when they hear. They don't realise the impact that can have.
Well, yeah, I think it's such a thing that's so common now. Like, almost like you have these restaurants that literally go out and, it's mainly in America and that sort of thing, but they literally are like, we eat this amount of food and we'll give you like free food for the rest of however, and you're literally like glorified. It's kind of glorified now, because even when like I'm sat with my mates at home, I can even say that like we'll have like enormous meals, and then if like one of us doesn't finish it, we're all like, what? You're not going to finish that? It's almost to be like, oh, I've been a bit of a pussy. Like, but like realistically, it's like, it's normal, because you shouldn't, it is true that like it's, sort of, if you really think about it, sort of even like back in like when you're going all the way back in the day, in like the hunter-gatherer times, you wouldn't be eating anywhere near as much as we do now, whereas obviously it is advised you have, 3 meals a day, and you have your 5 a day and all that sort of stuff, but it does make sense that sort of statistic would live in that. But I was also wondering, what are some of the, because I think everyone just assumes that IBS is all physical, which is what I definitely did at the start. You just instantly assume it's all physical, it's all to do with the digestive system and weight. But obviously I think even myself, I'm not very aware of sort of the mental and social strain it can have. Because I spoke with a friend of a friend who has dealt with like, not IBS, but they've dealt with it was some other form of digestive problem that basically they would literally say when they are on nights out and all this sort of stuff, the first thing they do when they get in somewhere is where's the toilet.
Yeah.
And you kind of forget that like that will impact somebody's social life and that sort of stuff more than you could probably think.
Yeah.
Especially when like if you want to go out for like a meal or you want to just go out on like a night out. Because I can't imagine, does alcohol have quite a big effect on?
Yeah, it can be different for different people, but yeah, for sure. I mean, alcohol it can be, you know, a pro-inflammatory, and a lot of alcohol that people drink isn't very high quality either. They can have a lot of like, sulfites in and stuff, so it's definitely a trigger for a lot of people. But also just the impact of being aware of that can really, I do feel like in a way it's like a social impairment because it does impair your social life. And I mean, if you're trying to date, then, you know, and you're in the first stages of dating someone and staying over, that's like, oh my God, well, how am I going to cope with this? Because there's so much stigma around anything to do with gut. You know, I talk about the gut all the time, so I don't really care. I talk about stool habits as much as anyone wants.
Yeah.
But like for most people, it's like, oh, you wouldn't really talk about that. So it can have a massive impact. And also I found regularity. So if you're not eating, you know, regularly and your gut is kind of in a nice rhythm of what to eat and when it's going to digest and knowing what it's going to expect. If you're maybe like binging food more and then you're going out and binge drinking, that just like really overburdens your gut a lot and it can impact your gut microbiome as well. It can kill off certain bacterial strains. But yeah, it has a huge impact because you're just consistently aware. Even when you're not in a flare-up, you know that you could have a flare-up. And then if a flare-up happens, it kind of, you know, it hits you quite hard because it's the anxiety that comes with it, I think, and the stress that comes with it, with having IBS. Yeah, I feel like I went on a tangent, but...
No, it's perfect. Tangents are great. But obviously, as you were saying, sort of, is there anything specifically that you've had to sort of deal with on the mental side of things that you wouldn't mind sharing with maybe people out there who are also going through it and they think, no, it's affecting me more mentally than I think I'm letting on? Yeah,
for sure. I would firstly say recognise that it is, because if anyone says it isn't, I probably wouldn't believe them at first, because it does have an impact. Like any health condition is going to have an impact on your mental health, but especially if it's gut related, because there's so much embarrassment and stigma around it.
Yeah.
Something I do with a lot of people, and I try to encourage people and myself to remember to do, is like radical acceptance of your situation. So basically being radically accepting, and that doesn't mean just accepting that it will always be this way, but being really consciously aware the reality of your situation at the moment and accepting this is where you're at now. Because a lot of people will wish they didn't feel a certain way and wish they were not experiencing this and try to act as if they don't have this issue and try and just go about going out and drinking loads and eating a big meal and living their life as if they don't have it. But all that does is it compounds the issue, because it can cause you more flare-ups, but it also means that you're kind of avoiding the elephant in the room. And, you know, that's the elephant's still there, right? Like you can't ignore it. You can only ignore it so long.
You can't just put a curtain around the elephant and pretend it's not
stood
stood there.
Exactly. So I think having radical acceptance helps you to think, right, what's the reality of my situation? The reality now, so if I have a flare-up, I think, reality is I'm really bloated and I'm feeling really uncomfortable, right? So what do I know helps me with that? Reducing my stress levels, maybe not having like really heavy meals, and just give it a couple of hours, do some deep breathing and some yoga, and honestly, it helps me so much. But I only know that because I've been accepting my situation and then working with my body and thinking, right, what are you trying to tell me? So when I have a flare-up, I think, what are you trying to tell me right now? What is it that I've done recently that's led to this situation? Rather than, oh, I wish I didn't have this and I'm going to go out anyway and go and eat a curry and then go drinking with my friends and drink red wine, and that's just going to make it 10 times worse.
Yeah.
Then, you know, you're just feeling even worse. So I would say radical acceptance, because it helps you to identify how to move forward. And also just have like a curiosity mindset around it. So get curious what your body's trying to tell you, instead of, like I always say to people, your gut's not out to get you. Like, it's not trying to fuck up your life, although it might feel like that. It's not trying to do it.
Yeah.
It's trying to communicate something to you.
Yeah.
So if you're able to be curious about it, listen to what it's telling you and work with your body, because honestly, the resistance and the frustration just comes down so much, and then you can just be like, right, what do I need in this situation to feel better, rather than trying to just live as if I don't have it. And in my experience, that's helped me a lot with my anxiety around IBS, and helped me just to be more open with people about it and just be like, yep, this is what's going on right now. And then you don't feel like you're missing out, because you can just be honest about the situation.
Yeah. And on the topic of dealing with IBS, I think it's very interesting, sort of a few key things. Obviously, I've from looking at it, so the main things with dealing with IBS was dieting, changing your lifestyle, therapy, and medication. I don't think I've missed any out there too much.
You mean in terms of how I've managed it?
In terms of how they tend to be managed.
Oh, okay.
And for me, I think it's really interesting with dieting because dieting is one of the biggest failing industries. 95% of diets don't actually end up working after the first week. And so I think you're vegan, aren't you?
I'll be honest, I'm like a reductitarian. So,
Okay.
so I try to live a vegan lifestyle, but sometimes I do eat a little bit of halloumi cheese.
That's fine.
But that's because I'm Greek, I can't help it.
Yeah,
It's in my
that's
genes.
fine. I honestly don't think I could. I think I would struggle a lot to go vegan because I've tried with the whole cutting out meat, but more from the environmental point of view. Because fun enough, the thing that basically I don't eat fish. I haven't managed to cut out anything else yet.
Yeah.
But it was after watching. I don't know if you've seen Seaspiracy.
Oh yeah, my friend told me not to watch it because I'd cry. Because I don't eat meat anymore because of Cowspiracy. But yeah, she said this is really good, but you'll cry if you watch it, so don't watch it.
Yeah, it's quite hard hitting. And funny enough, it's the way that different people view it because I wanted to watch it because I thought I want to educate myself on this. And at the end of the day, I can stop eating fish and chips. I don't mind. It's one of those. Basically, after watching Seaspiracy, I was like, I just don't think I can eat this anymore because I watched it twice, once on my own, and I sort of tried and it didn't really work out. And then I watched it once with my girlfriend, and then both of us went, right, we can hold each other to this. Don't eat fish. And literally since then, it's been about 7 months, neither of us eating fish because we just try and cut it out because it's literally just, you watch it and you think, God, it's a big issue because obviously the overfishing and all this sort of stuff, but now I'm going on a tangent.
Sorry,
so the main thing I wanted to ask you about was the therapy that goes along with IBS or what can be used to treat IBS, because I was very intrigued to find out that you could go to therapy for such a physical thing. And I was just wondering if you could shed some light on how that actually works.
So I think, is this in terms of like the medical field?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think in terms of therapy, I mean, there is a link between like your serotonin levels and IBS. So some people go on actual medication for it. But in terms of therapy, I mean, I was never personally offered that, and I don't know anyone who has done that, but I think it mostly relates to your anxiety levels that can trigger it, and also how you manage it and how you relate to your IBS, essentially.
Right.
But I've not ever personally had it, to be honest, or know anyone who has. But yeah, I think it's around how you manage your stress levels, your anxiety, and also literally how you relate to it and your IBS, because it is like we said, a social impairment. It can impact your mental health as well. But if it's triggered by depression and low mood, or it's linked to anything like serotonin levels or anxiety, therapy is only going to be helpful, right? Because it's going to help those things to reduce, or well, that's the aim. And then if that's linked to your gut health, then that's going to potentially help your gut to be better. So for example, if you have high anxiety and then you do some self-help around that, like guided self-help or CBT maybe, to help reduce your anxiety, you're not going to be in fight or flight so much. So then hopefully your triggers are going to go down, so you're not going to experience IBS as much as you did before. So yeah, haven't had it myself personally, but I understand what it to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you. No, I was very curious on it, but also obviously to go into more how you've dealt with it, what have been the main factors for you? Like, was it lifestyle changes? Was it dieting? What's helped you the most in what you've found?
What's helped me the most is, I think there are quite a few things. Definitely probiotics. I don't think I'd be able to manage it if I didn't use probiotics, because my gut microbiome was always probably quite depleted and quite imbalanced because of the antibiotics I had. So probiotics definitely helped. Realising that I had ADHD was a huge thing, because I would not eat, and then I would eat too much, and I would overburden my gut, and I wouldn't be able to regulate myself in any way in terms of what I was eating as well. So that was a huge thing, and calming down my anxiety, because I realised I'm always like running on this motor all the time.
Yeah.
So that would obviously stress my gut out as well as the rest of my body, and then I would get IBS flare up. So realising that really helped. Just having being in regulation a lot for me. So going to the gym regularly, sleeping at good times, because as soon as I'm out of like a regular cycle with anything, my whole body notices it.
Sort of adding routine.
Definite routine, and like just having things happen regularly. So like going to bed at the right time, waking up at the right time, because I'm just super sensitive to any changes.
Yeah.
And then things like digestive enzymes quite helpful for me in the beginning, especially because I was just really just wasn't able to digest any food, wasn't able to, didn't really feel hungry a lot of the time because I had quite bad anxiety when I was younger. I just didn't feel like eating. So then when I was eating, my body basically wasn't producing the stomach acid that it needed to be able to break it down. So I wasn't digesting food properly. And also drinking enough water and good quality water, like filtered water, because that's so important to keep your gut lubricated, essentially, help you to produce stomach acid and stuff. So I'd say those are the main things that have helped me. But also just knowing how to manage triggers. So being super aware of stress, it's like my main trigger. Knowing that if I eat too many FODMAP foods or beans and lentils, that's going to be a trigger. And being like, cool, that's fine. I know that triggered me, and then I know it will go in a couple of hours or days. And knowing things like the 80% rule. So if I'm really bloated, I'll just eat to 80% full and give myself 12 hours between my dinner and my breakfast, so my gut's got time off. Just little things like that, I think, mainly help. There are like lots of different tools I have that I use.
So it's almost sort of small changes, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
Just sort of to keep to a routine. And I think that's, pretty solid advice. Yeah. But obviously, you've got your main, is it 2 different locations that you work at for your Atavia Nutrition?
I'm only online now, to be honest. Like, I see people online most of the time.
Okay, got you. Yeah. And so, but on the side of that, you've happened to get into the habit of podcasting, such as this. Yeah. So was the Teaching My Friend Nutrition, was that the first one that then got you into that? Yeah. And then now it is Gut Reactions, which I actually really like that name.
Thanks.
And so the first one was you and your friend Laura, who was a comedian.
Well, she would love to hear that. Yeah, I think she's a comedian. She cracks me up, but she is a singer-songwriter. Oh, okay. But we'd always just talk, especially through the pandemic. She'd always ask me questions about health and, what supplement should I take for this? And I'd just like voice note her back, and she'd be like, we should do a podcast, babe. Like we should just make this. Like we should take it mainstream.
How every friends do it. Yeah, literally. Every single one of my mates, when they found out I did this, was like, just get us on. And I'm like, well, it's not quite like that's what I vibe.
You're not good enough for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we kind of
dysfunctional.
Yeah, literally. No, we did it to kind of. We wanted to firstly just have something like that linked us in the pandemic. You know, when we're quite separated. She lives down south, and we were like, let's just do this. It'll be a nice thing to do together. Yeah. And we were quite passionate about bringing health knowledge to women, because we were like, a lot of women just don't know a lot of stuff, and they don't know a lot about their health. So we did that together, and then we started working with a podcast marketing agency. She decided she didn't want to continue the podcast, and I was like, I do want to do it, but what do I actually want to do now? I have a chance to think about, do I want to continue talking about, obviously I can't talk to my friend because she's not there anymore, so that would make me look a bit insane. So I need to kind of shift it. And I didn't want to look at acne, anxiety and gut health like we did in that one. I thought, which one is the main, obviously all 3 I've experienced, I thought gut health is the main thing I want to talk about. Yeah. So that's how I decided to just do one on my own, essentially. Yeah, move over to that. In fairness, I know obviously the one now is specifically more about gut health. Yeah. But what I was really interested in is, I took Reactane when I was younger, and as I was looking through your podcast, I saw that you did like 3 episodes, which was sort of focused around Reactane. And obviously for me, when I was about, I've got to say 15, I had quite bad acne. And fun enough, it was my mum who was like, not in a harsh way, but she was like, we should probably sort of see if you would want to go on anything. Yeah. And I never kind of fully understood what Reactane was. And I was just wondering if you sort of could explain that a bit more, because I feel like there's so many people who go on it now, where it's like literally the first thing you hear when you hear about acne is people just go, go on Reactane. Yeah, it's scary. And it's one of those things, I don't know if it does help everyone, and I was just wondering what you know about it. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert in Accutane, but in terms of, I mean, I find it surprising that a lot of people get put on it quite quickly now. Yeah. I know someone who, when we were younger, they were put on it, but only after quite a lot of other like attempts. And when I had acne, I think they said it was like moderate acne. Nowadays, I think I would be put on straight on Accutane, but then I was given, topical cream, antibiotics. But in terms of how it functions, it basically dries out all of your whole body. Like it can dry out everything. So I know someone who went on it and they were like, my eyes were so dry I couldn't blink. Well, yeah, because I used to have to go into school, and obviously this is like quite like a prolific time in your school life where like it's already quite difficult because it's all to do with like social hierarchy and all that sort of stuff. And I literally it sounds very strange, but I went to an all-girls school for one of my modules for media, funnily enough. Yeah. And I remember I'd walk into these lessons and my face would literally be like shining
because I'd have to have like moisturised in the morning and it would literally be so dry and like my lips would be shining. And like I remember just, you'd get that fear of like walking in. Because to be honest, I was never too fussed about my skin, but like that was like one noticeable thing that I just remember, like when I'd walk into this like lesson and it would be like 30 people sat there and I'd have to walk in with like a glimmering face. And you're like 15, 16, well I would have been 16, 17 at the time. And you just think like, oh God, like I'm dreading it.
Yeah.
Like twice, 3 times a week, you just thought, oh, I'm dreading walking into this class, because you'd have all that, and then also it even affected like nights out because you can't drink while you're on it. And as a 17-year-old, that's like the one thing you plan on doing every weekend. It's like I want to
Can relate.
go out and drink with my mates. And so I think, I thought I'd bring it up because I think a lot of the time, as you said, like I don't really remember trying anything else before it. And it was just instantly. My sister went on it when she was younger. She's older than me, 3 years. And I think it was almost just like, oh, well, your sister was on it, so we'll whack you on it as well. And it was, as you said, very much like, let's just get it done.
Just try that. And also because the thing with Accutane is, I think the mechanism to dry it out is to stop feeding the bacteria that live like and are feeding on the oil, essentially, basically to starve those bacteria. So you don't have any oil, so you can't produce any, like the sebum isn't overproducing, and then you're not feeding bacteria, so you're not getting acne. But it depends on why you have that in the first place. So the gut is really linked to your, you have a gut microbiome, you also have a face microbiome. So you need to look at like, where is that coming from in the first place? The overproduction of oil, what's that from? A lot of the time it's from products that we use on our face. It might be from an overgrowth of certain bacteria, and maybe that's originating in our guts. But essentially a lot of people can go off for Accutane and then the acne comes back, and sometimes it can be even worse because you get a rebound. So it kind of is like, it's the classic thing of just symptom management and hoping that it just gets rid of it. For I think a lot of teens, because we have, when we're teenagers, we overproduce oil when the hormonal changes. Sometimes the Accutane can, get rid of it long enough so then when we've gone through that, it doesn't come back. But it isn't a great idea, I don't think, for young people to be on it. Like, I just feel like it's quite an intense thing, especially for when you're so young and you're still developing. And it's quite scary to be drying out your entire body. And like,
well, I was on it for 1.5 years. Oh
wow, that's long
so
time.
It's quite long. It's quite extensive, and I think that's what happened with me. Is luckily I went on it, and then in fairness, but like you lose hair. Like I remember, like my mates joke, but like I lost like quite a lot of hair. When like I used to have sort of like a bit, not thick, but a bit thicker blonde hair. And now I do have quite thin hairlines a bit further back, blonde hair. And I think with that, I was lucky enough that when I went off of it, my face kind of stayed quite clear, which I'm very grateful for, and I'm happy I did it. But like, it's one of those honest things that like, I think if I had a breakout for some reason again and it wasn't going away, and somebody said, do you want to go back on Accutane? I would just say no, because it's, for me, it wasn't worth it. I'm glad I did it the first time, but having done it before, I mean, obviously I'm speaking as if I did have this skin. I don't know how I'd feel, but I think because the first time around I wasn't too fussed, I just probably would be again. Like, I don't want to have to do that again for 1.5 years. I think it's also a bit of a bigger thing for girls with the whole beauty standards, especially because of social media recently, that like, the way I've always seen it is it's almost like a very cyclical nature to it from an outsider's perspective. And I completely understand why it happens. But like, for me, like, a girl will have acne, bad skin, however it goes. And then to cover that up, she will put tons of makeup on. And then I can't imagine that does very well because it just clogs your pores and all that sort of stuff.
It also feels horrible. Like when I had acne, I remember doing that and it felt awful because if you're using like I won't drop any brands because I don't want to get sued. But
so I'm sure they won't be watching.
You never know, it might go viral.
If they are, I'll wear makeup for an episode. I'll give it a go.
I feel like the standard ones. So you go into like Asda or something and you go to the beauty, like the makeup part. They're quite clogging. They're quite oily and they do clog your skin. And I did find when I had a big outbreak, it just felt horrible and you could literally feel it throbbing. Like you could feel your face throbbing and you could feel it getting worse. But if you use brands like I use Bare Minerals, I don't really wear makeup anymore, but if I do, I'll use Bare Minerals and there's only a couple of ingredients in there. One of them is zinc and that helps to basically tackle any like infections that cause acne. and it just feels so much better. But yeah, you're right. It feels horrible, but it also can clog up your pores even more and make the acne outbreak even worse, especially if you're like moving the bacteria around your face, if you're using like a brush or something, which is how you put on makeup, right? It can just make it 10 times worse. But then you're just caught in this loop of, well, I want to hide it, but then I'm making it worse, and it just feels, you end up feeling helpless and frustrated, and you just want it to go away. So something like Accutane, screw it, I want it. Like, you just want it gone. You get to that place of desperation. But I do find it like quite worrying that other things aren't explored first, just to see what helps, and if there's something less harsh, essentially, that can help, or just people being aware of the main triggers of it and how to manage it. It's quite an extreme reaction, I think.
It is, and I think that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I just think I know so many people went on it, even just me and my sister. We both went on it, and it's such a thing like that. But you almost I can't remember a single other option that got presented. Really, they say antibiotics, but then those had a similar amount of side effects to them. But I think, in fairness, the way I look at it is, I think instead of having to go at all the treatments, the way I look at it is, stop focusing on the treatments and start focusing in on why we have such a negative perception of spots, because everyone gets them. People get them well into their 30s. It happens all the time. But I think that's where the change kind of needs to be switched. Is like, look, I think I've had a quite severe acne, and I think I can fully admit it probably wasn't the most attractive time of my life, but it's one of those that I just don't feel like all my mates were never like judgmental about it, which is when whenever I used to have anybody come up and say anything to me, you just instantly think like, right, you're not worth the time, just whatever. I don't even care about your opinion, really. But that's where I think a lot of people there's a misconception of what we should be focusing more on, which is the treatments, and obviously it is obviously vital to look at them and review them and see how effective they are and how severe they are, but also why there's such a negative perception of bad skin.
Yeah, very true. And I think it's also just the beauty standards in general. And I mean, like, you look at Instagram and everyone has fillers and Botox and like perfectly clear skin. Sometimes I catch myself being like, oh no, I'm almost 34, look at my wrinkles. Then I'm like, get over yourself, mate, no one cares. Like, that's not realistic. But kind of, I think exposure therapy can be quite helpful for that. So I used to work in mental health, and obviously I'm not a therapist, but like exposure therapy to something, I used to try that with myself. And I do that now with a lot of my work involves being online with people and like seeing people on camera all the time. And I can't be asked putting like a full face of makeup on every day. I've not got time for that. Like, I don't want to do it. So I'll just be like, screw it, I'll just go on with no makeup. And now, to me, I just look normal when I don't wear makeup. But, that's the same as when I had acne. I would be covering it up all the time. And eventually I just thought, you know what, I feel so much better when I'm just letting my skin breathe and would just allow it to be there. And I would see it would improve with that as well. So just people being used to seeing that as my face. But no one really cares. Like, people might notice it, but people don't necessarily, like, we have the spotlight effect, right? Of we think, especially when you can feel the acne on your face, like throbbing, you're so aware of it and you think everyone's just staring at your acne as if you are just acne. But most people just see you, maybe notice your acne, and then just think, they're just thinking of you as a person rather than just focusing in. And you're just like zone in on it, and the other person's not really thinking about it. But I do think a lot of social media now, it's just everyone looks so amazing all the time, even if they're like doing a reel in bed, like, I'm just about to go to sleep, but I'm going to do this reel. It's like, you don't look like that. Come on, come on, bro. It's not realistic.
Was Kylie Jenner the first ever self-made?
Well, apparently,
female
but then
billionaire?
Apparently that's been debunked, but I don't know for sure.
No, but then you look, but anyway, not that I want to get into it, in the fact of like, it's through makeup.
Yeah, but it's also through her, I was listening to a podcast about this recently, and about her leveraging the things that she saw as flaws in herself. So apparently she was very the odd one out, or like, quote unquote, the ugly duckling of the sisters, and people made fun of her lips or something because they were quite small. Right. So then apparently she was like, screw it, I'm gonna, glow up, and basically leverage that to then make this makeup brand and make herself like super duper beautiful. Apparently. So but I think most of the industries, isn't it, one of the industries that never really fails is the beauty industry. People always want to buy, they always want to get manicures, they want to get their eyebrows done, or because people want to look nice. I guess because how it makes you feel as well, right? Like, it makes you feel good a lot of the time, or it can improve confidence for a lot of people. So
it was even interesting the fact that it didn't really suffer during COVID.
Yeah.
It didn't
when no one
really.
is even going out.
And it's like no one's even going
Yeah.
out. You're just in
Still
your
got the
room half the
people.
time,
Yeah.
yet you still want to put it on. And probably a lot of the time is because it'll be just such a routine for people now. Personally, for me, I completely understand why girls do it, but it's just not for me. As in, like, I very much prefer, like, my girlfriend, I think, looks beautiful when she doesn't wear it. And I prefer it. And I think she does her makeup well, but I just always think, like, just be you.
It depends, but it also depends on what you're used to, I think. Because say when I go over to Greece, they have such a different style as well. So I see people, like, it depends on what you see a lot of as well. Because yeah, when I'm in Athens, I mean, women in Athens are so glamorous, unbelievably glamorous, and like their makeup's quite minimal, but they just look so striking and amazing.
Yeah.
And then if I come back up, because I used to wear like fake lashes a lot, I'd be like, I look ridiculous. Like, this looks like I'm playing dress up. Like, it's so silly.
Yeah.
Because I was used to that, where I used to live, people would always put fake lashes on and stuff. That was like, well, that's how we're supposed to look. And a lot of it is, I can't speak for like all women, but for myself, I used to feel a lot of pressure, but then that was also put on by myself. I would put pressure on myself to match different standards, but actually I didn't really think about, what am I happy with how I look? You know, am I happy with how I look, yes or no? It was more the fear of being judged or, you know, not being enough or...
But I've always felt that is more from other women.
I had this debate with someone recently, actually.
What do you think about it?
I don't know. I think the thing is, I think you, like I say, you what am I trying to say? You look at your environment and you take social cues based on what you see, right? So I went to an all-girls school, and a lot of the girls there would be super glamorous and do their makeup and look great. So I would feel like, oh, I need to look like that too because I'm trying to fit in.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of where we get that messaging from, comes from media and comes essentially from the patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
But then a lot of it does come from seeing other women doing that. So I don't really feel like I can answer the question, but I think a lot of it just comes from the pressure that you put on yourself from seeing other people. But then, you know, there's a lot of things like when I was younger, I'd have lots of issues with boys who would say like, oh, you're ugly. And, you know, it would come a lot from...
Like, don't waste your time.
No, I know. But when you're young and you're like, oh, you're developing your sense of self, you would take that on board, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a bit of a complex answer. I don't know how to answer it.
No, I think it sounds more like on a local social level.
Yeah.
It's more of the other women around you. But when it comes to the grand scheme and more of the industry side of it, it's not necessarily women or men, it's just kind of more everyone.
Yeah. And also, I guess, just like the way that society views women. So when you look at magazines, I mean, I don't buy the magazines, but when I was younger, you'd always see those magazines of like, you know, I don't know, Camila Cabello has cellulite. Oh my God, how unbelievable. But then you'd see someone else like, oh, Katy Perry's, you know, looks so glammed up, like ridiculous. She's a mum, she shouldn't be doing that. So you just constantly can't win all the time. So it's like, so can I have flaws and that's okay? Or I should be glam and look really nice, but not too much. So you can never quite win
So
with it.
contradicting, isn't it?
Yeah, all the time. And I think...
Quick pause of the video to thank you for tuning in today. If you're enjoying, a like and a follow would be greatly appreciated. Stick around until the end for the sneak peek into next week's episode. Now I'll shut up.
Just don't buy those crappy magazines and just focus on what you're happy with. Like, I've never really had a guy say, well, I have actually. I have had misogynistic men in my life comment on how I look, but then I've also had women do it too. So yeah, I think it's multifaceted, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's less about gender, more about personalities around you, more likely. But anyway, a massive tangent after Reacutane. So back on to sort of your podcasting. So obviously you did Teaching My Friend Nutrition with Laura, and now it's more the Gut Reactions. What has been your favourite experience sort of hosting your own podcasts?
Definitely not talking to myself.
Yeah.
My favourite has probably been people messaging me, like people going out of their way to find my email or my Instagram and be like, oh, hey, you don't know me, but I've just listened to your podcast and it's helped me so much. Or, you know, they've had experience of IBS for ages and feel like they have been understood for the first time. Because I think a lot of people do have that experience where the standard thing you do when you have a health problem is go to your doctor. And if you don't feel like you're getting anywhere, you can feel so frustrated and you can feel gaslit a lot of the time of you telling me nothing's wrong, but there is something wrong. So how can that be? So yeah, favourite experience is connecting with people and seeing that I can make a difference and help people to feel, you know, hopeful about it and like it can be something that they can manage. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice, very good. I think that's sort of a similar reason to why obviously I don't have as much of an expertise in something that could be as helpful as what you do, but that's why I like to get people on like yourself who can explain this sort of stuff, because for me, I think there's always been there's a massive trend right now that podcasting is kind of the only form of like, it's the only sort of long form content that is prevailing. Every other sort of content that is prevailing is very short form, very social media, very snappy. Even YouTube, which used to be a very sort of long form content piece, it's only really sort of massive creators now that can still get away with it. You know, you look at, for instance, you know, Mr. Beast with his YouTube videos where it's literally like off the jump. I've just spent 5 million on this private island, and he's screaming in your face, and then it's about a 10-minute video. And podcasting is kind of the only long form content digitally. I know television and everything is still quite like that, quite inundated, but I think it's the only sort of long form of content where there's still quite a lot of like open conversation happening around all sorts of topics, because obviously it's all mainly independently, you know, produced. Obviously you have, you know, streaming deals and advertising deals, and so obviously you can't say certain things, but you know, now even when people look to get like their own, you know, reliable information, they go to podcasts, because everything to do with news now is like, as soon as somebody hears about a news network, the first thing that comes into your mind is, are they left or right wing leaning? Whereas a podcast is very much just like, I mean, you can look at the most recent election, you know, Joe Rogan was probably the man who managed to sway it when you really think down to it. It was sort of the election run of podcasts. And I think it's mainly because people have kind of started to associate independent media with truth rather than things that are owned by big media conglomerates.
Yeah, very true. And it's like the gatekeepers have gone a lot of the time. So before you would have to, you know, for example, you can self-publish a book now, whereas before you would have to go to certain publishers and, you know, you have to know people and you'd have to jump through certain hoops, whereas now you can put information out and, you know, have your own information out there and your own opinions and stuff, rather than hearing it from, you know, a big multi-million-dollar company, which what's their angle and who's funding them. And also with podcasting, I was reading recently that a reason why people really like consuming podcasts is because you build such a good parasocial relationship with the person you're listening to, because your hearing is one of the first things that develops when you're in the womb. So it's one of the most impactful senses that you can have to kind of start relating to someone. So allegedly that's one of the reasons why people really like podcasts, because you feel quite connected to the person, even if you've never seen them. Like I've listened to podcasts where I have no idea what the person looks like, but I really feel like I know them because I just feel connected. So I think that's why people enjoy consuming it as well.
Well, I think that's also why, because there was, fun enough, I was having a talk we had a talk from a guy in uni the other day who was talking about podcasts, and he owns his own company and things. I don't know if I should say this, but I'll just say it. He basically said, he was like, yeah, we're kind of going into this lane of visual podcasts. And I was just sat there just thinking back of it, that's just television. Like he's like, you know, we're creating a story and a video around the podcast that tells the story. And I'm like, but that's not a podcast then, really, is it? A podcasting is a style. That's what I sort of heard. I thought, a visual podcast. I thought, I get it like this, like having a video to go with it. And I think that's a lot of the time, that's why people have sort of like all the sort of big podcasts always have the person's face within the logo or the YouTube banner or the Spotify thing, because it's sometimes, as you said, you listen to it but then once you've listened to it, I'd say 90% of people go, what does this person look like?
Who are they?
And then they can literally just easily on Spotify just scroll down and then it's there. So I think that's always just been an interesting part of it for me, thinking about how it's kind of, people have just kind of shifted towards it. But since you obviously, you do your own podcast and then you also have your own social media, which sort of is very much related to sort of your work as well. I'm interested to think whether you think that the overall effect of social media on sort of health and wellness is more positive or it's more negative, and why would you sway the way you do?
Wow, I don't like sitting on the fence, so let me think what my decision is.
That's fine. You're allowed to.
I think it's quite nuanced, and I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword because we have so much access to so much information now, whereas before you might only be able to find one opinion in one book, and that's it. And it might take you, going and finding that book to get that information. But now there's so much more access to loads of different opinions, loads of different types of information, which is good because it gives people the ability to empower themselves, but it's also very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conflicting opinions as well. So you might hear one thing from one person, then hear another thing from another person, and it can get quite confusing. And what that can do is just make you feel even more overwhelmed and stressed out about it. And also mean that you don't stick at one thing long enough, potentially, because you're hearing all these different influences. So when I was thinking about like a business coach, who would I look at? I was looking at loads of different people and I just thought, how do I know which one's right? How do I know which one to follow?
Yeah.
Like what's the metric to use that for me personally? Should I be doing who I like the most, or like what should you use? And I think that's the same with health, because health conditions, generally speaking, are quite individual. So IBS, one person could have, post-infectious IBS from when they got food poisoning. Another person could just have, a specific set of food sensitivities and they've got leaky gut and they need to work on their gut. Two very different things, but how do you know like which one you should follow?
Yeah.
So I think it's nuanced. I think it's good because it gives people a lot of information, but I think people should take it with a bit of curiosity and a bit of a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
Including my own stuff, because I'll put information out there, and I'm saying generally, this is my experience. I say on my podcast, like, can't say about you specifically because I don't know you. So even that information that I put out, I'm never saying like this is the one thing, because you can never really say that unless you see the individual.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know it's a bit of an on the fence answer, but
no, because it's true. Because I asked that question because it's true that it's you can't really sit there and be like it's this or that.
Yeah.
Because everybody experiences a different way. It's more about experience than fact.
Yeah.
It's what you've had in your life, not what everybody knows.
Yeah.
Because it's either you have a positive or you have a negative. But I think right now, especially in general, a lot of algorithms when it comes to social media are promoting that negative stuff more than they are the positive, because it gets clicks and that sort of stuff. But your whole show looks at the solutions to a lot of this sort of stuff and your experiences and that sort of thing. But it's the same thing with this. This podcast is literally about bringing people on to talk through life's toughest moments and sort of how they overcame that and all that sort of stuff, because people have more interest in experiences that they may not have had and the stuff, sort of the negative stuff. That's why, news networks never really that positive. It's always very negative news.
Yeah.
This war's going on. This school has just gone out of business. This charity has just lost its founder, this whatever. It's all very negative in the sense that that's the news that people enjoy. Yeah. Weirdly enough.
Yeah. Well, it triggers I guess it probably triggers a dopamine hit in a way, because it triggers your fight or flight. It piques your interest. And even in podcasting, there's things around how you title episodes, for example. And if you gave it a really bland title, probably people would be like, oh, whatever, that just seems boring. Yeah. But if it's like a really intriguing, shocking or polarizing title, it's going to draw people in more. Yeah. And I think a lot of the time, I mean, I can't speak for other creators, but I guess a lot of content that's being put out there has to be quite shocking just to compete with the rest of, especially on things like Instagram and YouTube. You probably need to be against the competition so you can get the algorithm on your side. And that's the downside of it, I think, is the scaremongering as well. And I think something that I did a few years ago was purposely join a lot of IBS support groups on Facebook just to see, what the vibe was like. And the amount of posts on there that all complete desperation posts, this will never work, I'll never get better. And that immediately spikes your attention because our brains are hardwired to look for danger. We're not really that far evolved now to be able to like turn that off, because we're still hardwired to be like, oh, is that danger? Yeah. But then we don't realise we're not under a specific threat right now, but it seems like a threat. So then we end up engaging in it, and then you just end up feeling worse. So I think that can be the problem with content, but that's my hope in terms of what I do, is to help people realise you can live with IBS and have pretty much a normal life, and you can recover a lot of your symptoms, in my experience. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And it's not going to be some a crazy solution. Like, I hear people all the time who are like, oh, I tried this diet. Like, oh, I tried to do the FODMAP diet. I'm like, no one, show me someone who could live on a FODMAP diet their whole lives.
What's the FODMAP diet?
FODMAP diet is getting rid of certain foods that trigger IBS. So it's like high sugar, foods that have high sugar count. So things like onions, garlics are like the main FODMAP foods. But there's a whole range of foods that are high FODMAP that basically you can really struggle to break down.
Right.
And you can use it as a tool to remove those foods and see, right, I took those foods out. Did my symptoms go down? Yes, great. That means that I'm deficient in certain bacteria. So what I need to do is work on my gut microbiome. But a lot of people now say you need to get rid of FODMAPs, to the point where I've had therapy and she said to me, oh yeah, you're a gut specialist. I've worked with people before and they have quite bad IBS. And I'll say just get rid of FODMAP foods. But there's so many foods that are FODMAP, you can't live on that diet long term.
Yeah.
But there are so many people who say like, yeah, do this diet or do that diet or go carnivore diet and don't eat veg anymore or like fast 4 times a week. And it's like, that's not, like it gets people interested because it seems so extreme. It's like, well, this is such a big thing. This must be the cure.
And you do it for a week and then it's...
And it's not sustainable and it doesn't really address the problem. So I was talking to someone about FODMAPs earlier and said, yeah, we'll use it as a tool to see, do you respond to that? And if so, it tells you what's going on. Or if you, I don't know, if you do fasting for a week or something, I'm not into fasting, but if people do and you feel better on that, well, what's that telling you? Is it that you're eating too many carbs? Maybe it's because you're eating too much or whatever it is. But generally, you can't stick to that. But I think people kind of put out content sometimes that, you know, seems like it's going to be the magic bullet, but it's nothing is really.
People are obsessed right now with the easy life hacks.
Yeah.
And the easy way to get, because obviously, everything somebody does, whether it's everything somebody does, whether it's habits or routines, you do it because you want the best outcome with the easiest amount of effort put in. And so I think people, this is going back to how people title things and how people present things online, which is, you know, it's like clickbaity titles and also like, you know, it's renowned that, you know, if you put a question in the title, people will, even it's sort of some sort of psychology theory that even just by the person reading the question and saying it back to themselves in their head, it intrigues them more. And as the more outrageous the question, you know, it could literally, it's what some people do where like, you know, especially it happens in podcasting because something like this, which will be, you know, I'll have had hours of podcasting and it will turn into, the title will be like 3 segments of what you've spoken about, but and each of those segments is like 5 minutes, but then there's another hour 15 of podcasting that you spoke about tons of other stuff, which is still valid and interesting, but people want the stuff that's going to make them click on. And you know, if you know, there's literally like whole AI generators now for this sort of stuff that generate YouTube titles and generate YouTube descriptions, and it's like goes with the algorithm of YouTube and it makes it all go well. But with your podcast that you have now, the Gut Reactions one, is there anything that you're sort of looking to do, or what are you hoping to continue it for just as long as you can, or are you hoping to move into a different field with another host or anything again, or possibly guests, or are you hoping to just keep it the same?
Great question. Oh, I'd love to get Laura back, to be honest. I do miss her. I do miss her.
Yeah.
I think my ultimate aim is I just want to be, I don't know how to word this. I say this to my friends sometimes and they're like, you need to think of a new phrase. I'm like, I want to be the basic bitch of IBS. Like, I just want to make it.
You want to be the face.
I want to be just like, listen, let's just make it super simple and like relatable as well. So not some like big gatekeeping, like, oh, I've got this big secret. Like what IBS is, just kind of like normalizing it.
Yeah.
And I just want to bring people into a community. Like my ideal situation would be for people to have a community together where we can just like navigate IBS together, destigmatize it, work on our mindset around it, and like being able to accept that this is how, you know, our lives are and what makes it better, what makes it worse, but also help people to understand, because I think there's only so much content you can put out that's generalized, and you do get to a point where it has to be, the person has to look at their specific, you know, issues like their biology and stuff and their own issues with their gut. But I think my ultimate goal is just to build a community around IBS so that people can have access to, you know, more positive information, learn from me as well, what works and what doesn't work, and debunk some of the myths that people hear and things that don't help. yeah, just to kind of make it, I don't know, start an IBS movement.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll protest in the street.
Yeah,
Most underrepresented health condition.
yeah. It's no, it's good. But and do you think that podcasting is the main way to create that form of community?
I would say, for me, yes. I think podcasting feels a lot more intimate for people. Like I said, with listening to somebody and having that like parasocial relationship. I think if it's more short form content like Instagram, I mean, first of all, I hate doing Instagram. I do it, but it's not something that I enjoy.
Hate it. I had to record. I recorded a trailer for this yesterday.
Oh, really?
Well, I'm like just talking right to the camera,
horrible.
and like God, like I must have done it about 15 takes, and like Lily, my girlfriend, was recording it, and she's just like giggling behind, and she's like, "Don't say that word." And I'm like, "What's wrong with that word?" She's like, "Just don't. Just don't. Change the word. It's fine."
But I think because it's so, like with podcasting, you're able to be yourself. What I feel, I'm able to be myself more. I'm less aware. Like, you don't have to care about what you look like. You don't have to like worry about, you know, how you present and how people judge you immediately.
Yeah.
You're able to let your guard down a little bit more. And I think nowadays, like pandemic, obviously no one had anything to do. Now people are so busy and we're so overwhelmed. I think something like podcasting, where you can integrate it into your life, your daily or weekly life, whilst you're like walking the dog or cooking or cleaning or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a very easy way to engage with that media as well. And yeah, it doesn't feel overwhelming, because I think if you're listening to someone talk, you can like zone in and out and take away the main bits. But if you're watching a long YouTube video or you're scrolling on Instagram and trying to read reels, I just find that it can be quite overwhelming for people. So I feel like for me, I feel like it's the best medium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think media-wise it definitely is.
Yeah.
And I think I think people can, because of how genuine podcasting is, people can tell the difference between somebody who's doing it because they are passionate about it and are doing it because they want a money grab, basically. They want advertisers, they want et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The things that are going to get them money, which basically in podcasting is advertising and sort of streaming deals and all these things that you get to later down the line. But it's also becoming one of those sectors that's radically saturated now. Like there is just so many. And it makes people realise just how many niches there are. And I think, in fairness, with IBS, I think people consider it a niche, but it's probably not.
A niche would be like, I was thinking about this recently, a niche, it would be busy millennial women who have very specific stress-triggered IBS, who like, it would be like a niche within a niche within a niche, because IBS is still quite broad. It's still, you know, it can be, you know, you could have a niche in IBS where it's about, I don't know, hormones and how your hormonal levels impact IBS, or something very specific. But yeah, IBS I think is still quite broad. Yeah.
It's a huge topic, and that's, especially when I was researching into it, because obviously I'm getting people on who know a lot about their sectors, but obviously I don't want to come into it blind and seem like I haven't done any research, because obviously the whole reason I'm getting them on is because I am interested. So I'm happy doing research. It doesn't feel like work. It just feels like I'm just getting to prepare. Like when you sit here, you don't really think it's work. You just get to sit and chat to someone with sort of cameras around and things. But one massive part of it, which I was really quite interested in after you told me about it, was the vagus nerve, which is, from what I read and understood, the main nerve that is the link between your brain and your gut. And I was quite interested to find out that there was much of a link, and I was just wondering if you could sort of explain that link and sort of go in a bit more detail that I wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of the vagus nerve, so if you imagine when you're a fetus and you're growing, first of all, you're just a bunch of cells and they start growing and growing. Everyone knows how babies form, I guess. But like, you are just a bunch of nerve endings. And as you elongate and your head starts to form and your body starts to form, those nerves elongate, but they still stay connected. So essentially, the bottom of your brainstem, your vagus nerve, kind of goes through your abdominal cavity and it links into different parts of your body, so your heart, for example, and your gut. But it actually interweaves into your gut. So if you imagine sort of like a tree, like roots of a tree, they kind of like sink into the ground. That's kind of what the vagus nerve does in the gut. And you have this two-way relationship between the gut and the brain. So your there's evidence to suggest your gut can react quicker, and your heart as well, I believe, reacts quicker to stress than your brain does. So you can have a much quicker reaction. Your heart will beat faster before your brain realizes, oh, there's panic or there's like something trying to get me. And same with your gut. So that can send signals up to your brain, but also vice versa. So if you have, like most people, a medium level of chronic stress, most people are stressed most of the time or have some level of stress, that can send signals to your gut of we're in stress, and that can impact your gut's functioning. But also if you then start to have, I don't know, say bacterial die-off and you have depleted gut microbiome, that can send signals to your brain and you can end up having this message go the other way. So essentially something I find really interesting that I love talking about is vagal tone. So with, say, your friend who goes to the gym like 7 days a week, say you go to the gym once and you might, feel better and it has a good impact, but it is not necessarily enough to maybe bulk up your tone or like tone up your body. If you go 3, 4, 5 times a week, maybe you'll start to see that tone come a lot quicker. Same with your vagal tone. So vagal tone is basically how toned your vagus nerve is. So you could have a really toned vagus nerve where you do a lot of practices that help it to go into relaxation states. So those
As
are
in
things
similar to like a muscle?
Yes,
Right,
yeah,
got you,
similar
right,
like that.
right.
So like if you do a lot of deep breathing or you do a lot of yoga or you do things that activate and strengthen that vagal tone, someone might jump out of that curtain and try and make me jump because my vagus, hopefully it won't.
No one's like that.
Yeah,
You can come out now.
hey, damn, you ruined it. Because my vagal tone is strong, I maybe wouldn't jump so much. I've got a friend who, she cracks me up. She's the jumpiest person I know.
Right.
To the point where she walks out of the cinema when there's a really scary bit on. Last time she did that,
What's
someone
the point
came
of
out.
that if you're going to go see a scary movie?
Well, I know. Well, we want a little bit of scare, but not too much. But last time we did it, some guy thought it was his girlfriend and he jumped out at her and she freaked out and she like properly jumped out of her skin. But she's really jumpy and I'll say to her, like, you've got really poor vagal tone. Like, no offense. Your vagal tone's rubbish. But that also has an impact on your gut as well. So random, right?
She was like, wow.
She's
Cool,
like,
man.
she's like, no, weird insult, but okay.
Yeah.
But like that can impact your gut as well. So say you have stress-induced IBS or it's a big trigger. If you have a really weak vagus nerve and you're really easily stressed, or you might have a deadline at work or at uni or whatever, and that could stress you out so much compared to someone who has a strong vagal tone. So your IBS could be triggered much quicker than somebody else's who has like a strong vagal tone. So yeah, I just found it very interesting that a lot of people don't know that. And again, I think vagus nerve is more of like a buzzword now. Like a lot of people talk about it more commonly, whereas they didn't used to before, because there's more research coming out about it essentially. And people are aware that, as my dad said years and years ago, the gut and the brain are connected. Everyone's going to know it one day. And he was right.
Did you have any interest in this sort of field when you were younger because of your dad, or was it all later in life?
The
you
opposite.
The opposite.
I would rebel and be like, I don't care about health. I'm going to go drink WKD in the park. I was like the
like
biggest
all
rebel.
the cool kids at the time.
Obviously, like who didn't do that? Only the cool people did. But yeah, I was the opposite, where he'd say, you should be vegetarian. I'd be like, screw it, I'm going to eat meat. Purely because, when you're raised English and you have a Greek dad, that's quite the difference of like, culture and, how people are.
Definitely.
So I would just be like, basically I would be a little shit and be like, no, I'm going to do the opposite. And I would rebel out. But I think when I became so unwell and was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, maybe you were right. Got to the point where I was like, yeah, I need your help now. So yeah, it was always in the back of my mind, but I think it was only when I really needed it that I realised, oh, okay, this is something I want to take really seriously and start looking into.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And does your mum work in any sort of similar field, or is she completely...
No, she's separate from that. No,
Okay,
we're having an argument at the moment trying to get her to stop eating gluten, so we won't go there.
Why gluten?
Because it clearly has an impact on her.
Okay.
And so I'm gluten intolerant. A lot of people have non-celiac gluten intolerance, so it's not a celiac, but they are intolerant to it and it can have quite bad impact on them. And I say to her, like, there's something you need to stop eating, but...
Yeah, but it's hard to teach your parents something. Like, it's one of those things that they brought you up, so it's just like, let me live my life, how I'm going to live it. I think that's sometimes what I find is, as people get older, you're just more set in your ways. Yeah. But is gluten intolerance something that can be a genetic thing?
Yes, I believe so. We did a test when I was at uni. It was a DNA test, and it did look at, I can't remember exactly how it looked at this, if it was like a DNA strand or something, but I remember the lecturer saying to me, yeah, you have got this, I think it was genetic, where you have a 1 in 200 chance of the gene being switched on. So we all have genes that can be switched on and off all the time. So you could have like a precancerous gene, or even how you metabolize caffeine, which can be impacted by our environment. She said you have a 1 in 200 chance that you'll become gluten intolerant, but that doesn't mean if, it means when. because it's 1 in 200, that just means the more gluten you eat in the more condensed period of time, the quicker you'll trigger it.
Right.
And then one summer I ate loads of gluten and was like, oh, yep, she was right. So, yeah, just testing her theory.
Yeah. And so gut health to sort of like genetics and that sort of thing, does it have a massive correlation outside of gluten just in general, or is it very much like it is just completely dependent on the person?
In terms of what? In terms of gut health?
Yeah, in terms of IBS even.
There's not a specific, I believe, genetic like DNA that can be like, yeah, you're going to have IBS or not, but there is like a correlation in genetics.
Right.
So, for example, what did I read recently about if you have a dad with IBS, you're 25% more likely to have ADHD, which is interesting because I have ADHD and I'm pretty sure my dad has IBS or had it. But I think it's not where you can look at like an IBS gene, but people who have had parents who have IBS or gut health issues then do have that as well. And I guess it would make sense because you are made up of those people, right? And especially if maybe your mum has poor gut microbiome, you're feeding on her literally when you're a baby, right? When she's pregnant with you. So whatever she has, you're going to have too. So it does have an influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ADHD, the fact that you bring up is interesting because my mate Dion, who came on the podcast the first season, spoke about, because he's got very severe ADHD and he also has quite bad, not currently, but he has quite bad eating disorders. It's a similar thing, obviously. It's kind of hard to word it, and I asked him how to word it because it's one of those things that it's like, again, it's something that you can maintain.
Yeah.
It's never necessarily goes away, but it's something you maintain. But he often says, like he has this ritual where whenever because he's doing his bulk, as all of them are, and he has this ritual where whenever he has to sort of like get something down, he plays this one song that like he can just focus on that song, and then it distracts him from the eating side of it. And I think, obviously, I know IBS isn't quite, all of these sort of eating disorders and diseases are very different. He suffered with anorexia and bulimia, so sort of two of the worst ones to sort of have combined. Yeah. But he always says that ADHD was something that impacted it a lot.
Yeah, can relate to that. I think because I used to feel very overwhelmed by food, and sometimes I still do, where at the point where I'm like, oh, this is just too much, I just can't think about it. Because when you have ADHD, it's such a dysregulation thing, and things can feel so like overwhelming and intimidating. But also, apparently under the umbrella of neurodivergence also lies OCD as well. So you can have like intrusive thoughts and things like that, which I think can manifest in terms of food for a lot of people. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I can strongly relate to what he's saying. I used to say I have opposite anorexia when I was younger. I said to the doctor, I was like, I think I've got a new disorder called opposite anorexia. And he's like, you're so narcissistic, Charles. You haven't made up a new disorder. But I always eat and I still feel skinny. He's like, that's because you are. That's not what you do. I'm like, okay, fine. So I would be like the opposite, where I'd want to eat more, but then I'd be like, this is so overwhelming and it's just too much to think about. And because there's a lot of sensory issues with autism as well, and ADHD, I feel, it just feels like too much, right? So where he's saying about the eating and having to zone out, it's like a focus thing. Like it just feels too much, probably overwhelming for him, I imagine. Yeah. Eating food just feels like a big thing. Yeah. So yeah, I imagine that has quite a big impact. But I think probably a lot of people, I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but I imagine a lot of people who have ADHD also have gut health issues because the link between the gut and the brain. Yeah,
well, he has, he has told me before. He does have something to do with his gut that does affect him. And I think he spoke about it on the podcast. Yeah. But yeah, that is quite interesting. You wouldn't think that it had any correlation at all. You'd think
because we look at things especially in terms of like the medical field now, everything's very separated. So if you have a problem with your kidneys, you might go and see a kidney specialist, or if it's skin, a skin specialist, but no one ever really looks at bringing it all together. And that's the same with gut and mental health as well. We see it very separate, like, you see a mental health professional, obviously as you should, but we don't look at it holistically in terms of how each part of your body affects and interacts with each other. Yeah. So it's just seen as very separate. I
think that's a big thing that social media has also had an impact on though, because when I look at it, I think both mental health and like gut health, people are very quick to self-diagnose themselves now when it comes to social media, because people will literally post like these are the symptoms
Yeah.
of like ADHD, and it's like, you stay awake late. It's like, well, I don't know, people say, oh, I've got ADHD now. So I think, and some people are very quick to hop on that train now, which a lot of the time, especially with sort of the mental health side of it, I think distracts from the people who actually have been diagnosed, they're on medication, or they're looking to make a lifestyle change, and it's other people who are taking that shine off of them when really the focus needs to be on these other people.
Yeah, or just making it a thing, like it could be a bit of like a trend, right? Of like, oh yeah, I fall under this umbrella too. I remember saying to my friend when I was like, by the way, because my friend always says to me, you were diagnosed before it was cool to be diagnosed. You were like the last person. As soon as you did, then everyone started getting it. I was like, yeah, listen, I made it popular. I'm not a narcissist, but like I'd say to my friend, like, oh, I start noticing it now, and people I hang out with, I'm like, oh yeah, you definitely are on. I think you've got ADHD. My friend said, like, not everyone can have it. And I just said, I think it's just a blend of people in society. We probably just have, some people have, lie on the spectrum of some kind of neurodivergence, some people less so. But it's like, you have to reach a certain threshold to be diagnosable, right? Yeah. But it's also, okay, cool, I've got ADHD, but that's not my whole life. It's like, who am I actually as a person? How does it impact me? And what helps me as an individual, rather than it being, boxed into that diagnosis necessarily.
I think it's also, I think it mainly comes from this sort of trend of labeling, which people feel a sense of community, especially online, of having a label, and all of a sudden, I think labeling isn't necessarily an unhealthy thing overall, but when you start to make these labels your whole personality, I think that's when people can lose out, because you think there is so much more to you than this one label that you've stuck on yourself, that you've given yourself, that might not necessarily be true. A lot of the time they are, but I think overall it's not an unhealthy thing. But I think for some people who have a bit of an addictive personality and a bit of insecurity possibly, when they find a label, it's almost that like fantastic, like I've got a label, like I'm one of them. Yeah. And then that becomes something they base a lot of their identity around.
Yeah. Well, and it can become limiting as well, because I literally recorded an episode on this earlier about mindset and why that's one of the biggest things that will make or break your IBS. Because if you have a limiting mindset or a defeative mindset, you will always see every flare up as, something I have to just live with, and this is just me, and you'll resign yourself to it. If you approach things with curiosity, same with things like ADHD, if you think, okay, cool, well, this is my diagnosis, well, what does that mean to me? How does it impact me? What other aspects are there of me? Because it's not just that thing. Yeah. You'll start to be able to improve certain areas of your life. Same with IBS, when you get a trigger. If you're more curious about it, you can think, okay, what's it trying to tell me? Like, what was the trigger? What's my body trying to communicate with me right now? Then you can look at, what was I doing an hour ago, 2 hours ago, yesterday? What's been different? What's triggered me? That helps you to identify triggers. But same with like having labels. Sometimes I think, because I definitely had this at one point where I was like, oh, it's just my ADHD. And then people were like, you just need to sort yourself out. Because you've got it, but it doesn't mean that you can't manage it. It's like, okay, fine. Like, I'll do some work around it then, I guess. Because it's so easy to be like, I just can't do that. Sorry. My thing is like, I struggle a lot of the time. I used to be chronic late at everything. And instead of being like, right, okay, I'll set off early. And if I'm late because something that's not my fault, then fine. But usually I'd be like, oh, it's fine. I'll just be late because that's just, everyone will expect that of me. Yeah. But that's just a cop-out. I don't have to be late. So now I'm super aware of leaving 10 minutes early. Yeah. And then, just being aware of those things and taking accountability for my behaviour, because it's my life at the end of the day. Yeah. And there are some things that I can't help. Like, I can't help the racing thoughts that I have, but I can help how I respond to that. It's just something I have to be aware of. So, I think a lot of people do have that, because it's just nice to be like, oh, sorry, I can't help it. But it just limits you at the end of the day.
It's not an excuse, but it's just something that you can kind of pin it to for the time being, when actually you're kind of like, oh, I probably should possibly have a look into this. Yeah. But do you do any of the sort of stuff to do with like tracking, like with whoops and things like that? Do you use any of that sort of stuff, or are you quite...
No, because I think for me, the health anxiety would probably take over. Okay. And I think I'm quite good at being in touch with my body and knowing what it's telling me. I used to track my sleep quite a lot, but then I would just become a little bit too obsessed with it, where I'd wake up in the morning, look at what my sleep score said, and be like, oh my God, I'm going to be tired all day. And then I'm going to have the worst day ever. Yeah. And then I'll get to work and be like, I actually feel fine. It's like, nope, you're tired because your sleep score said it. And it's like, was that really helpful? Probably not. So I think it can be helpful for indicators, but these things with tracking your glucose levels all the time, and I think it can just lead to a bit of obsessiveness with people, and for some people I don't think it's healthy. For me personally, I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah.
It would just cause me to be a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, I think it can give you a bit of an addiction to numbers.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's all to do with, you've completely lost track of what you actually are aiming for.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's just like, oh, well, like I nearly got 8 hours, but I got 7 hours 45 sleep, and that means I'm going to be tired for the whole day, like you said. And then all of a sudden, because this thing that's you're supposed to completely base your judgment off of is telling you something like, well, you're going to be tired today. It's just that negative affirmation of you are going to be tired today. So then you're in your head going, I'm going to be tired today. It's kind of the same way that I think people look at like luck and unluckiness. Is like if you think you're going to be lucky for a day, you're not actually being lucky, you just notice all of the things that go positive in that day instead of the negative stuff. And then when you think you're unlucky...
Yeah, it's gratitude, 100%.
When you're unlucky,
it's like gratitude practice. No, 100%. Because I don't know if you've ever done a book called The Magic, which is like a 28-day gratitude practice.
Oh, nice.
And it literally, I think it's by the same author that you've got there, The Secret, Rhonda Byrne. So it's 28 days and you'll do different things about like programming yourself, essentially retraining your brain to look for positive things and be thankful. And then you see all positive things and you're like, oh, life is actually amazing. Like I didn't realise until now. But I think with technology and stuff, and also coming back to social media, and all the different, information we get, I think it also just takes us away from our body. And we obviously as we should hold science in high esteem and we rely on it, but sometimes we can do it a bit too much.
Yeah.
And, we've lived for, however long humans have been around for, a long time without having all of this. And we have been able to tell what's been wrong with us. Like when we were cave people, we didn't have all this stuff going on. We would just know what we needed. We'd listen to our body. And I think I want to encourage people to get back in touch with listening to what your body's saying and getting in touch with you rather than relying on all these other things, because it can just be, less helpful, I think.
Yeah. And as promised at the end, the sneak peek into next week's video. Please enjoy.
Yeah, I actually lost 32 kilos in 9 months.
That is impressive to do in 9 months.
At that time of doing the fitness and working on myself, I started to learn about NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming.